Hello, this is Mark Greyer, and for the next hour, you'll be listening to a reading of articles and features from the April 16th issue of the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Okay, let's get started. First article, Done and Dusted? Trump's portrayal of the war in Iran collides with reality. President Trump is confronting a crisis that is not bending to his narrative of a pretty reasonable new regime in Iran and all but assured victory for the United States. President Trump is trying to cast his Iran war as all but over, a done and dusted success. But after years of trying to impose his own reality on the world, he has now run into a crisis that is not bending to his narrative. It's a new regime, Mr. Trump said on a Fox Business interview that aired on Wednesday, referring to Iran's new leaders. We find them pretty reasonable, to be honest with you. By comparison, pretty reasonable. It was the latest instance of Mr. Trump trying to spin a regime change, an accomplishment in Iran, even though analysts believe the war may have only increased the internal sway of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, and hardline military force that has long been a major player in Iran's politics and economy. The new supreme leader has not been seen in public since he replaced his father, who was killed at the start of the war, but his elevation as head of state has been another symbol of continuity. Most generously, you could say, there is a leadership change, said Benjamin Ben Talibou, the senior director of the Iran program at the Foundation of Defense of Democracies, a Washington think tank with a hawkish stance on Iran. It is incorrect for the proponents of the conflict to frame this as a change for the better. Indeed, trade through the Strait of Hormuz remains far from normal, and Iran's government is not bending to Mr. Trump's demands on its nuclear program. But in Mr. Trump telling, U.S. victory in Iran is already clear. In the Fox Business interview, reprising his frequent comments of the last 2 weeks, Mr. Trump asserted that Iran's Navy, Air Force, and anti-aircraft equipment had all been wiped out, along with many top officials. If Iran did not rule out nuclear weapons, Mr. Trump said, we will be living with them for a little while, but I don't know how much longer they can survive. In fact, analysts say the 40 days of the U.S.-Israeli bombardment that ended with last week's ceasefire appear to have increased the power of the military and hardliners in the Iranian system. Despite the widespread destruction and the killings of officials by the U.S. and Israeli militaries, the Iranian regime is acting emboldened, having demonstrated that it can wreak havoc in global trade and send U.S. gas prices soaring. The result is that a president who has long relied on threats and bluster as essential foreign policy tools seems to be groping for the leverage to bring Iran's regime to heel. Analysts say that the success of the administration's latest effort, its blockade of Iranian ports, depends on the ability of the United States and its allies to withstand the additional pressure that Iran could impose on Persian Gulf trade in response. Mona Yacoubian, a former State Department official and Middle East expert, drew a contrast in Mr. Trump's struggle with Iran to his success in exacting concessions from U.S. allies by threatening them with tariffs. This is not something he has control over with the stroke of a pen, she said. She directs a Middle East program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, a Washington think tank. This is where the president's approach of his own charismatic and powerful personality, in my view, is not a match for the complexity, the opacity that is the case with Iran. The administration has been eager to portray a groundbreaking deal with Iran as being possible. Vice President J.D. Vance said Tuesday that Mr. Trump sought a grand bargain in which the United States would treat Iran economically like a normal country if it acted like a normal country. He doesn't want a small deal, Mr. Vance said. Mr. Vance ended an extensive session of talks with Iranian officials in Pakistan last week without an agreement. He said Tuesday that the United States would keep negotiating and that the people we were sitting across from wanted to make a deal. But Iran appears to have taken note of the leverage it has against Mr. Trump, given the pain of rising gas prices and Republican worries that the unpopularity of the Iran war could hurt the party in the midterm elections in November. That means that even though Iran appears ready to negotiate, its leaders could make demands of their own on matters like the future governance of the Strait of Hormuz, while still driving a hard bargain on nuclear policy, the issue that matters most to Mr. Trump. Nate Swanson, a former U.S. official who was on the Trump negotiating team with Iran until July, said the regime in Tehran was not going to capitulate to Mr. Trump's demands in negotiations, just as they did not on the battlefield. Mr. Trump was unlikely to succeed, he said, in trying to force transformational change on a system that feels like it just won a war. Iran will only make a deal they see as being in their interest, Mr. Swanson, now at the Atlantic Council, said that will most likely be small and transactional. Mr. Swanson also cautioned against reading too much into the perceived pragmatism of individual Iranian negotiators like Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf, the parliament speaker who Mr. Trump has cast as part of a more moderate new crop of Iranian leaders. Without a consolidated power base, all Iranian officials will need to emphasize their hardline bona fides, he said. It's not in his interest or anyone else's interest to stray from the party line right now, Mr. Swanson said. Okay, moving on. Next article. Stocks extend rally and oil prices stabilize as investor optimism grows. Stock markets held their gains on Thursday as oil prices stabilized on optimism that diplomatic talks could yield a permanent peace deal in the Middle East. The S&P 500 hit a record high on Wednesday and is now 2% higher than before the fighting began on February 28th. Even though the ceasefire between the United States and Iran is set to expire next week, the two sides have continued to negotiate, and the White House expressed optimism about the prospects of a deal. Oil prices hold steady. The price of Brent crude, the global benchmark of oil, was about $96 a barrel on Thursday, up about 1% from the day before. West Texas Intermediate crude, the U.S. benchmark, rose slightly to about $92 a barrel. Investors and analysts are focused on the continued disruption to shipping in the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow waterway between Iran and Oman that is a vital trading route for oil and natural gas that normally carries as much as 1/5 of the world's oil supply. Stocks gain globally. In Europe, stocks traded higher. The Stoxx 600, a broad index that tracks the region's largest companies, inched up 0.3% and is on track to regain most of the losses it's sustained since the war broke out. The FTSE 100 in Britain ticked up 0.6%, and the DAX Germany gained 0.5%. Futures on the S&P 500 pointed to a modest increase when stocks resumed trading in the United States on Thursday, pushing the index further into record territory. Stocks in Asia, where countries import vast quantities of oil and gas, were broadly higher. Japan's index 225 rose nearly 3%, while South Korea's benchmark Kospi index rose more than 2%. Hong Kong's Hang Seng and mainland China exchanges posted gains. Gasoline prices pull back. Gas prices fell again on Thursday, retreating to a national average of $4.09 a gallon, according to the AAA Motor Club. The increase has raised the cost for drivers 37% since the war began, although prices have come down over the past week. Gas prices didn't move in lockstep with crude, usually trailing increases or drops by a few days. Diesel prices also fell slightly to $5.61 on Thursday. They are still up, though, about 50% since the start of the war. What they are saying: an astonishing rally, but beware looming risks. The swiftness of the recent stock market rally has been nothing short of astonishing, Jim Reed of Deutsche Bank wrote in a report on Thursday, noting that the S&P 500 has risen nearly 11% over the past 11 trading sessions. Markets often recover within weeks of big geopolitical events, he noted, but the failed peace talks in 2022 between Russia and Ukraine, despite initial optimism, offer a pertinent reminder of potential downside risks. The extent to which investors pivot from looking through to trading through the conflict will be determined by the ongoing earnings announcement, oil prices, and further headlines confirming hopes of a ceasefire turning to a truce, noted Bob Savage of BNY. Oliver Allen of Pantheon Macro said that the research firm expected to see signs of households cutting back on discretionary spending in the coming weeks, as the cost of higher gasoline continues to show up on bank and credit card statements. Pantheon expects U.S. consumer spending to be flat this quarter, but that forecast is contingent on how the shock to energy markets unfold. Okay, moving on to the next article. Israeli and Lebanese leaders will speak Thursday, Trump says. Neither side confirmed a meeting. Israeli and Lebanese officials have said a ceasefire in the war against Hezbollah is under consideration. President Trump said that Israeli and Lebanese leaders would speak again on Thursday as he sought to build on lower-level talks this week aimed at ending Israel's war against Iran-backed Hezbollah. There was no confirmation from either Israel or Lebanon. A senior official in the Lebanese presidency, speaking on the condition of remaining anonymous to discuss sensitive matters, said that he was not aware of any planned call between Lebanese and Israeli officials. The Israeli Prime Minister's office said it would not confirm one either. Mr. Trump did not give further details, including any information at which officials would participate. Trying to get a little breathing room between Israel and Lebanon. It has been a long time since the two leaders have spoken, like 34 years, Mr. Trump wrote on social media late Wednesday. It will happen tomorrow. Nice. The conflict between Israel and Hezbollah, the Lebanese militia backed by Iran, has threatened to upend the ceasefire between the United States and Iran, which expires next week. Iran has insisted that the ceasefire be extended to Lebanon, a proposal Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel has rejected, with backing from senior White House officials, including Vice President J.D. Vance. Lebanon and Israel, who have technically been at war since 1948, do not have official diplomatic relations. On Tuesday, Israeli and Lebanese officials held talks in Washington, their first in decades. The State Department said afterward that steps had been taken toward further direct negotiations between the two countries. Israeli and Lebanese officials have said that Israel is considering a short-term ceasefire in Lebanon. Two Israeli officials said the ceasefire could begin as early as Thursday and last about a week. The Israeli government has yet to formally sign off on the plan, and it remains unclear whether Hezbollah would comply, even if Israel and Lebanon agreed to one. President Joseph Aoun of Lebanon views the ceasefire with Israel as the natural entry point for direct negotiations between the two countries. The Lebanese presidency said in a social media post on Thursday. Fighting between Israel and Hezbollah has continued during the two-week ceasefire between Iran and the United States. Israel has stopped the strikes on Beirut, the Lebanese capital, but has continued attacking Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. Days before the talks in Washington, the Israeli military launched 2 attacks on towns in southern Lebanon on Sunday, killing at least 11 people, according to Lebanon's official news agency. The Israeli military said it had killed an armed combatant on the same day in a raid on which it described as a Hezbollah infrastructure site in southern Lebanon. And on Thursday, the news agency reported clashes overnight in the southern Lebanese town of Brit Jabin between Israeli ground forces and Hezbollah militants. The Israeli military has been surrounding the town and advancing through that for days now. In a statement, the Israeli military said that its forces had raided a Hezbollah compound in the town area on Wednesday and located weapons there. Israel launched its military campaign in Lebanon in early March, days after the United States and Israel began an air campaign against Iran. Hezbollah had fired rockets at northern Israel in solidarity with Iran, its patron. Since then, the group has launched more than 6,500 rockets, missiles, and drones towards Israeli territory and at its forces in Lebanon, according to the Israeli military. Much of the incoming fire has been intercepted. Late last month, Israel's defense minister, Israel Katz, said that Israel would demolish Lebanese towns near the border and set up a security zone, which would displace hundreds of thousands of Lebanese residents. All right, moving on. Next article. In the House, Republican plans go awry amid party divides. Fresh off a 2-week break, lawmakers returned to turmoil in the House, where legislation to reopen the Department of Homeland Security is stalled, and the GOP is struggling to keep its agenda on track. Members of the House of Representatives came back from their 2-week break on Tuesday night as planned and cast votes to name no fewer than 14 post offices. After accomplishing that, majority Republicans' plans went awry. By Wednesday morning, their efforts to renew a warrantless surveillance program that is set to expire next week had run into trouble, and a Democratic bid to force a vote to restore deportation protections that President Trump is trying to end for the Haitians living in the United States was on track to succeed. The one-time punch reflected divisions in the GOP ranks that are on display at the least opportune time, with midterm elections only months away. It also showed how the party's minuscule vote margin and the political headwinds it is facing have conspired to snarl its agenda. And it underscored the dysfunction that has taken hold in the House, where a bipartisan deal to end the 2-month-long shutdown of the Department of Homeland Security remains stalled, while Republican leaders refuse to take it up because of resistance in their ranks. Speaker Mike Johnson returned from the recess with a packed agenda, including the promotion of tax cuts that Republicans passed last year and the extension of an expiring surveillance program. But as has often been the case, Mr. Johnson struggled to keep control of the House floor, with libertarian-minded Republicans demanding curbs on the warrantless surveillance program. He is forced to postpone a vote and haggle with the holdouts over the possible revisions, even after Mr. Trump took to social media to push the party to authorize it without changes. Then, Democrats chipped away enough Republican support to force action on a bill that would extend deportation protections for Haitian migrants, a direct challenge to Mr. Trump's decision to terminate them, and to Mr. Johnson's firm grip over what comes to the floor. 6 GOP defectors from politically competitive districts sided with the Democrats to circumvent House leaders and demand a vote on the legislation, now expected on Thursday, though it has little chance of enactment. And though Democrats have yet to bring it to the floor, they have threatened to force consideration of a measure to limit Mr. Trump's ability to continue to wage war in Iran, a vote that would be politically tough for Republicans amid growing dissatisfaction over the conflict and the rising prices that are tied to it. All the while, the Department of Homeland Security remains shuttered, with no clear timeline for the House to pass an agreement to reopen it. While Mr. Johnson has endorsed it, that timing, too, is out of his hands, as hard-right Republicans have signaled that they will not allow the legislation to reach the floor until the Senate moves on a separate filibuster-proof bill to fund immigration enforcement. Mr. Johnson has contended with such threats to his hold over the House's legislative agenda throughout his time as the Speaker. He generally does not let other representatives or reporters see him sweat, though he has occasionally pulled back the curtain to reveal how overwhelmed he feels in a job that he has compared to firefighting a war. But during the news conference on the House steps, under a sweltering sun, Mr. Johnson's efforts to recenter Republicans' tax agenda on tax day were entirely overshadowed by the legislative challenges he faced and by actions that Mr. Trump has taken. After Republican leaders spoke about their tax policies and jabbed at Democrats, the first question Mr. Johnson fielded was about Mr. Trump's clash with the Pope. "I'm not one to criticize clerics and religious leaders," said the Speaker, who has placed his evangelical Christian beliefs at the center of his political life. But then he appeared to do just that. A pontiff or any religious leader can say anything they want, but obviously, if you wade into political waters, I think you should expect some political response. And I think the popes received some of that, he said. Back inside the House chamber, as one bill he had wanted to bring up fell by the wayside and another he had wanted to block moved ahead, Mr. Johnson sought to claim at least one unadulterated win, as Republicans hashed out their differences on the surveillance bill behind closed doors. The House was debating a resolution that all GOP members appeared eager to support, a measure praising the tax cut law they pushed through 9 months ago. But that too was not to be. Shortly before 5 p.m., House leaders informed members that the vote on the self-congratulatory measure would be postponed, along with the rest of the chamber's business, until Thursday. All right, moving on. Next article. Labor Department investigates texts among secretaries, family, and staff. Secretary Lori Chavez de Remer asked staff members to bring wine to her hotel room and to keep in touch with her husband and father. The Labor Secretary and her top aides and family members routinely sent personal messages and requests to young staff members that are now under review by the department's Inspector General. Ms. Chavez de Remer and her former Deputy Chief of Staff sent texts asking employees to bring wine to them during trips for the department. Sometimes the request came in the middle of the workday. Ms. Chavez de Remer's husband exchanged text messages with young female staff members, as did her father. Some of the young women were instructed by the secretary and the former Deputy Chief of Staff to pay attention to the men, according to people familiar with the investigation. The text messages have been reviewed by the New York Times. The messages were gathered as part of a month-long investigation into Ms. Chavez de Remer's leadership of the department, which began with a complaint filed to the Inspector General's office claiming widespread misconduct. The inquiry has revealed deep frustration in the department with the secretary, who took office in March of 25. Staff members across the political spectrum have described her as disconnected from the work of the department. The internal investigation is in its final stages. 4 people have been forced out of their jobs, including the Secretary's former Chief of Staff and Deputy Chief of Staff, her Director of Advance, and a member of the Secretary's security detail with whom she was accused of having an affair. 3 staff members have filed civil rights complaints against her and the department, describing a hostile work environment. In an April 2025 exchange provided to investigators, the Secretary's father, Richard Chavez, wrote to a young female staff member, "Hearing you are in town, wishing you would let me know. I could have made some excuses to get out and show you around. Please keep this private." The staff member responded, "Will do, no need to worry." She apologized for not reaching out and said she would be back in Oregon soon. Ms. Chavez de Remer's family is based in Oregon, and she served 1 term in the House for the state's 5th Congressional District. "When are you leaving? And where are you staying?" he responded. Mr. Chavez has not been accused of wrongdoing. Representatives for the secretary and her husband did not immediately provide comment. A few weeks later, the same staff member messaged Ms. Chavez de Remer's husband, Dr. Sean de Remer, and apologized for not being in touch. I've been having so much fun traveling with LCD and being in the moment for everything. I promise from now on I'll check in. He responded, "You better. I was feeling forgotten. I figured you were still in church, repenting after your exposure to the demon state of Oregon." Dr. DeRemer, an anesthesiologist, was barred from the department headquarters this year after several women told the Inspector General's investigators that he was making unwanted advances at them. One of the women filed a report with Washington's Metropolitan Police Department, which opened a sexual assault investigation. The department and the federal prosecutor's office later said they would not bring charges in the matter. The original complaint to the Inspector General's accused Ms. Chavez DeRemer and her aides of drinking on the job and keeping a stash of liquor at the office, according to the New York Post, which first reported the complaint in January. In one text message, Ms. Chavez DeRemer asked a staff member to bring rosé to her hotel room. "Do they sell by the bottle?" she asked. The staff member responded that they did, but were out of rosé. The secretary then responded with another selection. "How about the Josh Sauvy B?" The messages are undated, but a picture of the menu in the text message exchange suggested it is from a hotel bar in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, where Ms. Chavez DeRemer went on an official visit last July. Just before 3 p.m. on Friday, September 5th, Ms. Chavez DeRemer's deputy chief of staff at the time, Rebecca Wright, told one of the women to pick up a bottle or two of wine or champagne. "Lori wants to do a toast when this meeting is over," Ms. Wright said. Okay, let's move on. Next article. How Trump's clash with Pope Leo turned into a fight over theology. When President Trump and GOP leaders denounced the Pope's comments about the U.S. attack on Iran, they touched off a religious debate over what is and isn't a just war. The three most politically powerful men in America, President Trump, Vice President J.D. Vance, and Speaker Mike Johnson, have intensified their criticism of Pope Leo, who has repeatedly spoken about Roman Catholic Church teachings against war and for peace in recent days. Their fight is not simply political, it is fundamentally religious, as the Republican leaders are now arguing with the Pope over theology to support the U.S. and Israeli military campaign in Iran. On Wednesday, on Capitol Hill, Mr. Johnson, who is not Catholic but evangelical, said that he was taken a little bit aback when Pope Leo said last week that Jesus does not listen to the prayers of those who wage war, and that their hands are full of blood. There's something called the just war doctrine, Mr. Johnson said. After Mr. Vance, who has been a Catholic for about 7 years, admonished Pope Leo to be more careful if he was going to opine on matters of theology. The chairman of the U.S. Catholic Bishops' Doctrine Committee shot back with a rare clarification statement about what Catholic just war theory really means. For over 1,000 years, the Catholic Church has taught just war theory, and it is that long tradition the Holy Father carefully references in his comments about war, Bishop James Mesa had written. To be a just war, he said, it must be a defense against another who actively wages war, which is what the Holy Father actually said. He does not listen to the prayers of those who wage war. Bishop Mesa added, when Pope Leo speaks as Supreme Pastor of the Universal Church, he is not merely offering opinions on theology. he is preaching the gospel. So, what is just war theory? At its basis, it is a means for people to distinguish permissible killing from illegitimate killing or murder, said Joseph Capizzi, Dean of the School of Theology and Religious Studies at the Catholic University of America. There are criteria for how to act morally when getting into a war, and then once you are in it. It is also an ethic about the good end of politics, the thing that politics ought to pursue, like stability and peace, which is why we see Pope Leo emphasizing that Christians should be peacemakers, he said. Just war tradition predates Christianity, as empires like the Romans had their own theorists, like Cicero, he said. The Catholic Church has a specific theology tradition about just war. One of the 10 Commandments is, "You shall not kill." So, what is the Catholic tradition on just war? The theology dates largely to St. Augustine, the political theologian from northern Africa who wrote in the early 5th century as northern tribes, sometimes called barbarians, were invading the Roman Empire. There was a kind of presumed pacifism in the first few centuries of the church's life, but now the church has responsibilities to society, responsibilities to protect the borders of the nation. Bishop Mesa, the Doctrine Committee chairman, explained in an interview on Wednesday. St. Thomas Aquinas further developed it in the 13th century, resulting generally in 2 sets of criteria, one for going to war and then one for continuing to participate in war, he said. We reluctantly will take up arms as Christian believers if we are facing an aggressor. And it has to be an immediate threat, Bishop Mesa said. Once we're involved in the conflict, it's not as if, okay, then all bets are off, we can do whatever we want. So what are the specific criteria? 4 general principles are outlined in the Catholic Catechism, paragraph 2309. The damage caused by the aggressor must be understood as lasting and serious, with concrete evidence, Bishop Mesa explained. All other means of ending the conflict must have been exhausted. There have to be serious prospects of success. Proportionately must be considered, as the use of force mustn't produce evils that are worse than the evil they're trying to eliminate. We need to go back and look at the criteria again, Bishop Mesa said. I think we'll find that it's very questionable, the actions that have been recently taken by the United States government. So how do you distinguish among different accounts of just war? Well, people misuse just war doctrine all the time, said Mr. Capizzi, the theology dean at Catholic University. Everybody thinks of their reason for waging war as the right and good reason for waging a war. And this is the point Augustine makes, he said. That doesn't mean all parties are in the right. Just war theory actually can determine that one party is in the wrong, he said. He pointed to Russia's invasion of Ukraine as a clear example, because Russia was the one that crossed a respected international boundary. That makes their activities suspect from the perspective of the just war account, in a way that Ukrainian defense against Russia aggression is not suspect, he said. Okay, on to the next article. Tellerico leads a Democratic cash surge. 7 takeaways from the 2026 filings. Democrats in key Senate races outraised their Republican rivals, But super PACs on the right are poised to play a powerful role in the midterms, new campaign finance filings show. Democratic candidates for the Senate are in good shape financially, but Republicans have an advantage when it comes to money from outside groups. That's the midterm state of play as the start of April, according to new Federal Election Commission filings that offer an up-close look at the finances of candidates, super PACs, and other political groups. Filings for some additional groups will be released next week. Overall, the filings on Wednesdays paint a rosy picture for Democrats at a time when party leaders are growing more bullish about their chances of reclaiming one or both chambers of Congress and offering a check on President Trump. Here are 7 takeaways. Tellerico is a funding-raising juggernaut. James Tellerico, the Democratic nominee for Senate in Texas, raised $27 million in the first months of 2026, a remarkable haul that far outpaced that of any other Senate candidate. His campaign said it was the most a Senate hopeful had ever raised in the first quarter of the year. His fundraising strength stems in part from his competitive primary battle in March against Representative Jasmine Crockett, but it clearly points to Democratic voters' rising hopes about the race in a solidly red Texas, as the Republican candidates for Senate are still contending with an ugly May runoff election. Texas, of course, has long crushed Democrats' dreams. Some Democrats worry the race could be a money pit, meaning that Mr. Tellerico could attract millions of dollars from small and big donors that might have been better spent elsewhere, only to fall short. The next point is other key Democrats put up strong numbers. Several other top Democrat candidates for the Senate posted healthy totals that were far more than their Republican rivals. Former Governor Roy Cooper of North Carolina, who is running in the state's open Senate race, and Senator Jon Ossoff of Georgia, who is defending his seat, each raised about $14 million in the first quarter. Mr. Ossoff entered April with a striking figure of nearly $32 million on hand for what is set to be one of the country's most expensive campaigns. Former Senator Sherrod Brown, running again for the chamber in Ohio, brought in $12.5 million, and former Representative Mary Peltola raised $8.9 million in her bid in Alaska. The numbers for Mr. Cooper, Mr. Brown, and Ms. Peltola include some money from allied committees. In each of those states, the leading Republican candidate trailed far behind. The only Republican with a significant financial advantage appeared to be Senator Susan Collins of Maine, who has more cash on hand than her 2 Democratic challengers and has her own well-funded super PAC ready to spend for her. But Republicans have a super PAC advantage. Senate Republicans' main outside super PAC is doing much better than its counterpart on the Democratic side. Entering April, the Senate Republican super PAC had more than twice the cash on hand than the Senate Democratic group did. That cash advantage, which is nearly $92 million, could help neutralize Democratic candidates' early individual edge. On the big donor front, it's Adelson versus Soros. Miriam Adelson, the widow of the longtime Republican megadonor Sheldon Adelson, has become one of the party's biggest contributors, particularly to the major super PACs allied with the GOP's House and Senate leadership. But she usually doesn't give big until the summer or the fall. This March, Ms. Adelson sent $40 million total to those 2 super PACs, immediately making her one of the biggest donors in this election cycle. Ms. Adelson's foil may be George Soros, the biggest disclosed liberal donor. In January, a group associated with Mr. Soros, the 95-year-old longtime funder of Democratic causes, put $50 million more into his main super PAC, Democracy PAC, for the midterm cycle. That followed a $52 million check that a different Soros group gave to the Democracy PAC last year. Mr. Soros's super PAC, in turn, gave $9 million to the main super PAC backing Senate Democrats this quarter. A Silicon Valley giant is spending big to push AI and crypto. The venture capital firm Andreessen Horowitz is a top donor to the flagship super PACs backed by the artificial intelligence and cryptocurrency industries, making it one of the cycle's biggest donors. The firm donated $25 million more in February to the top pro AI super PAC leading the future. In all, the firm has now made about $77 million in disclosed federal contributions this cycle. A pro-Trump crypto group is starting to ramp up. In September, a mysterious super PAC called Fellowship PAC said it planned to spend $100 million to push pro-Trump, pro-crypto candidates, but its funders and agenda have remained under wraps. Last week, the group announced some of its first endorsed candidates, including Nate Morris, a Republican Senate candidate in Kentucky, and began spending on their behalf. Elon Musk also disclosed an expected $10 million check to help Mr. Morris. And on Wednesday, filings revealed that the group's biggest funder, with $10 million, is Cantor Fitzgerald, the former firm of Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick. The crypto company Tether appears to be involved. The super PAC recently announced that a top Tether official would be its chair. The New York Times reported in September that the super PAC's backers would include Tether. A surprise sports betting super PAC. If the crypto and the AI industries were not offering enough spending by special interests, meet the latest player, the sports betting industry. On Wednesday, the filings revealed a super PAC called Win for America that is making a $41 million push from sports betting platforms like FanDuel and DraftKings to push policies that are friendly to the sports books, primarily through spending in state legislative elections. Okay, next article. 5 things to know about New York's proposed second home tax. Governor Kathy Hochul wants to tax second homes in New York City that are worth $5 million or more. Here's how the proposal might work. City and state politicians are lining up behind Governor Kathy Hochul's plan to tax New York City second homes worth $5 million or more. The proposal, to be included in the state budget, aims to help close a city budget gap and to add growing income inequity by targeting the ultra-wealthy who do not live in the city. Similar ideas have been floated before, most recently in 2019, after Kenneth Griffin, a hedge fund billionaire, purchased a $238 million apartment on Central Park South. That effort was derailed by the real estate industry, which lobbied heavily against it. But the political climate has shifted. Mayor Zoran Mamdani was elected in part by focusing on affordability and calling for relief from New Yorkers struggling to get by in the city. While Ms. Hochul has said she opposes the mayor's proposal for a tax on those earnings over $1 million, She wants to help him address the budget deficit, estimated at $5.4 billion through the next fiscal year. Although the governor's proposal is short on details, right now some questions can be answered. First is, what is the pied-à-terre tax? I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. A tax on second homes will be a yearly surcharge on any New York City residential property worth $5 million or more that is not the owner's primary residence. It would apply to people who live outside the state, but also to anyone who lives in New York State but has a second home in the city, as well as investors' properties that are not rented as primary residence. Second homes that are rented full-time to tenants will not be included. It is unclear if New York City's residents who own 2 apartments in the city will be taxed. The surcharge would be paid in addition to whatever property taxes are owned on a home. While it would apply to new buyers, the tax would also apply to long-time owners whose properties have increased in value over the years. New York City does not assess the value of all properties equally. The Department of Finance assesses the value of 1, 2, and 3 family homes based on market value, while condos and co-ops are assessed using a complicated formula based on the net income of the building. This distinction could affect how the state determines which properties are worth $5 million. The 2019 surcharge proposal, which would have taxed condos and co-ops that were assessed at $300,000 or more, and 1, 2, and 3 family homes assessed for $5 million or more, those numbers are not yet available for the governor's proposal. While the Hochul administration said the tax would deliver at least $500 million in revenue to the city, a 2020 analysis of the 2019 proposal by the Independent Budget Office estimated $232 million in revenue. Will this bring in revenue? Yes, said Abir Mendel, a senior policy analyst with the Tax Foundation, a nonpartisan tax organization. But will it bring in as much as the governor thinks it will? Probably not. There are plenty of ways for wealthy people to avoid taxes. Many properties are purchased as limited liability corporations, allowing buyers to shield personal assets from liability and maintain privacy, or as trusts to avoid probate. It is not immediately clear how the city and state would determine if those homes are primary residences or second homes. However, the state does have mechanisms in place to determine residency. People have to self-declare a property in the city or the state as their primary residence to determine where they pay income taxes. The state would most likely rely on that information to determine who is exempt from the surcharge. So how much would homeowners pay and how much would the city get? The details of the tax are still being fleshed out, but the surcharge would most likely be a sliding scale based on the value of the property, setting rates so as to hit the targeted goal of at least $500 million. So a $100 million penthouse would face a larger surcharge than a $5 million two-bedroom. It is unclear how many properties would fall under this umbrella. The Hochul administration estimates 13,000 properties would be taxed, but second homes in New York City would have been declining for nearly a decade. In 2023, about 59,000 units in the city were held for seasonal, recreational, or occasional use, according to the New York City Housing and Vacancy Survey, down from 75,000 in 2017. Demand for second homes is down nationwide amid high interest rates, high home prices, and a shift back to working in the office. In New York City, stricter short-term rental rules and a drop in foreign buyers may also have had an impact. So why is this happening now? Mayor Mamdani and the city council have until July 1st to reach a deal on the city's budget. During his campaign, Mr. Mamdani called on Albany to raise taxes on wealthy New Yorkers and businesses to pay for an agenda that included universal child care and free buses. But Ms. Hochul, a centrist who is up for re-election, has balked at any suggestion to raise income taxes. In February, she agreed to give the city $1.5 billion in aid. The surcharge allows Ms. Hochul to sidestep an income tax while also tapping into a broad sentiment among New Yorkers against absentee owners. So who supports this proposal? On X, Mayor Mamdani praised the announcement, writing, "We will be taxing the ultra-wealthy and global elites." It also has the support of the City Council Speaker, Julie Menin, who described it as a smart, sensible proposal. Leaders of the State Senate and the Assembly, who will have to sign off for the proposal to move ahead, expressed measured support. The image of a supersized, mostly vacant apartment building, the safe deposit box in the sky, has come to symbolize the vast wealth disparity in New York City. At a news conference on Wednesday, Ms. Hochul spoke to that viewpoint, saying, "They're part of our skyline, but those people are not part of our city." So, who opposes it? There was a swift pushback from the powerful Real Estate Board of New York, the lobbyist group for the real estate industry. A banner across the top of its website reads, "Stop the Pierre Arteri tax," and urged members to contact state representatives to voice opposition. Critics argue that a tax would dampen demand from wealthy buyers who could instead decide to take their money to states with lower taxes, like Florida. With weakened demand, builders might push back on construction, reducing supply in the midst of housing shortage and affecting construction jobs in an uncertain economy. This annual tax will weaken the city's broader economy, all without addressing its financial problems in the first place. The REBNY president, James Whelan, said in a statement, "Albany should focus on policies that encourage investment and housing production to create a more affordable city, not ones that stifle its growth." Okay, so you've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times, from the April 16th issue of the New York Times. Your reader today has been Mark Ryer. Thank you so much for listening.